Hello, everyone. We are back again for another episode of Inside Scoop. And this is becoming just one of my favorite formats. And one of the best parts of my job, actually, is to talk with interesting people. Maybe we need to change the title of this is Talking with Interesting People. But I'm your host, Stefanie Hoover, and I'm here today with Stephen May, who I've known. God, Stephen, how long have we known each other now? Can you do the math on that?
So it's plus 20 years, but I'm sure you don't want me to say your age or mine.
No, well, you don't
But
know how old I am,
we
I
go
hope.
way back. Let's leave it at that.
Way back in the day. And I asked Stephen to come on and talk with me because Stephen's one of my favorite people and been in the industry for a really long time, seen lots of things. Like we both have seen lots of things change over the years and so on. But Stephen, you are an entrepreneur. I'd say down to your cellular level, right?
Well, first of all, thank you for considering me an interesting person. That's much appreciated.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that everybody feels that way, but thank you, Stephanie.
Mhm.
I definitely consider myself an entrepreneur. I've been associated with the retail industry for over 35 years in a variety of different capacities. But one of the driving forces for me is never to remain complacent. So I was always looking for the next challenge. And I think that's the underlying spirit of a good entrepreneur is never get complacent, never be satisfied, always try to push yourself.
Right.
And not always successful, by the way. I probably learned more from mistakes than I have from my successes.
Right. And the reason why I thought about you, Stephen, for this too, is I see, people are trying to get out and do different things. I have people reach out to me a lot of times. They're in a consultant role or they're considering leaving their current role in asset protection and going to maybe sales or some other type of position. And especially now, like I feel like there's a lot of people in a transition space. Maybe a conversation between the two of us might offer some insight to them or some tips and how to sort of take that step. So let's kind of get back in our time machines and go way back to when you were in an asset protection loss prevention role and kind of what got into your mind or in your head that you were like, okay, let me try and go out on my own. Can you take us
Yeah,
back?
good question. I remember it very well, Steph. I was the director of LP at the time for J. Baker, which was a Boston-based retailer that had a bunch of licensed shoe departments, and they expanded their business rapidly into the specialty retail space in all different kinds of categories. And it was a great experience for me. I was able to build, I think, a world-class team, and we did a phenomenal job in helping that retailer control its shrink and maximize its profitability. But after about a decade of doing that, and they bought many different kinds of retailers. Some were distressed; they were in bankruptcy, they had lost market share, and our job was to kind of right size them, get them healthy, and get them profitable. And having just a fantastic team enabled us to do that. But after about 10 years, I felt like I was on autopilot. The underlying business, the parent company, had gone through its regular up downs, which every retailer goes through. I rode the wave up, I rode the wave down, and then they were correcting. And I found myself increasingly looking for other things to do. I had a great relationship with my boss, who when I first started was the CFO of the company. He became CEO. So he was very supportive. So I started looking at other opportunities outside of LP asset protection, and I ended up inheriting inventory control and internal audit, and those were nice to have. They expanded my background and my understanding of how to be a very well-rounded retailer with a specialization in loss prevention. But even after a couple of years of picking up sort of tangential functions or ancillary functions, I was getting, again, complacent. I was getting a little bit bored. The shrink was on cruise control. It was under 2% at retail, consistently year over year. Had a great team of people. I'm always a big believer in hiring the smartest people you can get. And they may indeed be smarter than you. In many cases, they were. Give them the tools, and then get out of their way. And if you're successful, then you have a program that really runs itself with a very talented group of team members. So I was approached by the CEO, and I told him that I was frustrated. I didn't feel challenged, and I was looking for a new opportunity in the company. And he suggested we just acquired a company called Casual Male Big and Tall. It is the largest big and tall retailer at the time, and it is today. It operates under a different name. But it was the largest men's big and tall retailer in the US. And they put in a new president who I was friends with. And we talked about me potentially moving from LP to operations as their head of operations, retail operations. It was about a 5 to 600 store chain, probably doing $500 million in revenue at that time and looking to grow. So though I had the bigger picture, my slice of responsibility was the loss prevention pie, right? With internal audit and some other add-ons. But I looked at the operations folks, my counterpart, the VP of operations, had payroll, store operations, merchandising, human resource, and they touched every facet of the business. And I thought that would be the next logical step to challenge myself and to grow personally and professionally. But at the same time, I had a great group of folks working for me, and you know many of them.
Right.
I would like to mention that I sat down and I talked to my key people at the time, which were Tim Casey, Dave Johnston, who we just spoke about, and John Feiss. And I talked about this concept of outsourcing the loss prevention function instead of running it as an internal only solution. And the genesis of that idea was the emergence of exception-based reporting. Raul Ricard, who used to work with Melville, helped develop a very robust reporting tool that allowed us to query point of sale exceptions, point of sale activities on an exception basis. Because, Stephanie, I am going to date myself right now. We used to go through these big computer mainframe reports that had the perforated light green and white paper that was this high.
Piles like this on my desk.
and I still have the worn out highlighters, and we would go through and manually look for transaction types that looked out of the ordinary, based on just a decade's worth of experience. And Raul said, "Hey, what if we could set up rules and you could do that automatically at the push of a button?" I said, "Well, that would be fantastic."
Right.
And I think before they spun off out of Melville, we were the first ever LP, not the first ever application for them, but the first LP application. And it worked incredibly well. We had a tremendous return on investment. And I looked at the LP function at that moment and said, if everybody's going to get on this boat of exception-based reporting, which I assumed everybody would, because it just made too much sense to me. And it was so efficient and it allowed us to target resources. That lent itself, I thought, to outsourcing. So not only do you support yourself with an outsourced software support, you could also use outsourced services. Right. And I spoke with Raul when he formed his business, which was called XBR, and his ownership team, and they thought it was a great idea. And as he deployed his application beyond me to other retailers, I think there was another retailer in Massachusetts called Lids. It's a hat store, right? I think they're owned by Hat World now, or I'm not sure what the current iteration is. But they sold only hats, very small footprint, and they struggled with the application. So he suggested they call me, and I did as a favor. I talked through the process we implemented to get the biggest return on investment, the biggest bang for our buck for the XBR tool. And they intimated that they would have liked to hire us to, help support them. And I said, well, I already have a job, thank you. But that sort of reinforced the idea of outsourcing LP functions, which was at this point had gone from a security function to a loss prevention function and has not quite matured into the asset protection function that we talk about today. So I thought, like human resource and other non-core areas of a retail business, it could lend itself to outsourcing. So I had these two opportunities: the director of operations for Casual Male Big and Tall, or build my own business. So if they both serve the same purpose, they challenged me to take something outside my comfort zone in both instances, I could have failed.
Right.
And that was indeed a possibility. But I was ready to risk and fail. But the challenge was, how do I fund this business? How do I get it going? So I explored both opportunities at the same time. I went back to my boss, the CEO, and said, "Hey, here's this idea. I think we can make money at this." And he turned me down flat. So I'm like, okay. He rather see me go down the operations role, because I had a proven track record
Right.
as one of his better managers, and I think he thought I'd find that more rewarding. So his intentions were good. So being the stubborn person that I am, I went and said, well, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I went back to Lids, which was in Weymouth. It was down the street from our office, and I was in Hyde Park, a neighborhood in Boston. And I sold a contract before I had a business. And I went back to the boss and said, "Hey, I got revenue. What do you think now?" And that was the genesis of us leaning into forming a business that we called LP Innovations. And I took the core team that was part of the internal LP department. We pulled them outside. We set up a separate S corp, and we created this thing called LP Innovations. We had two customers: my employer, my current employer, which was Jay Baker and all their retail divisions, and then Lids. And that was in 1998, 1999. And we ran that business for 22, 23 years. We grew it from 4 employees to probably somewhere north of, at its peak, 120 or so employees, outsourcing some great brands that they either outsourced the loss prevention function to us in its entirety or portions of it, and everything in between. And we came up with the concept of co-sourcing too, because outsourcing didn't truly represent what we figured out. It was, where do we fit? How do we fit into your culture? And then I had to learn a lot. Stefanie, I didn't know a thing about. I remember my boss, when he was the CFO, we were in a meeting, and maybe you've had a similar experience. And he had out a monthly P&L, and
Right.
at the bottom there was an acronym. It was EBITDA.
EBITDA.
And we're all talking. I'm a shrink guy, and shrink is not a GAAP reported number. Shrink is an internal reported number, but EBITDA is a GAAP reported number. And we're going through it. And he has a finance background, and he used to be in public accounting. And he's like, and for some reason he leaned over at me and he said, "So Steve, you know what EBITDA represents, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, net profit, right?" And so I was in the ballpark just through osmosis. But he says, "You know what the acronym stands for?" And I sat back and I said, "Oh," and all my peers are there. And I was like, either I'm going to do the old Irish two-step or just be honest. And I was honest. I said, "I don't have a clue." And then he gave me earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. It's a true representation of the health of a company. And I said, boy, there's a lot for me to learn when I don't know something as basic as that. So I leaned into him to teach me about how to read a balance sheet, how to manage cash flow, how to build a P&L. And I didn't get those things all right, Stefanie. It probably took me a decade.
It's probably a humbling experience, right?
Oh my goodness. And you have a similar background to me, because you were like me in an internal LP department or asset protection with some major retailers, but you made the transition to the vendor community, which what you alluded to is very difficult. And I learned not only I could leverage the ability to manage a great team. I stuck with the philosophy of hiring the best people I could find who were smarter than me and knew more than me, and get out of their way. But we all had to learn how to sell. And that was probably my most difficult learning curve. So those folks that are making that transition to consulting, to working in the vendor community, when you have relationships like you and I have, we can pick up the phone and call each other. But if I called you as Stephen May, the sales guy for LPI, looking to pitch outsourcing EBR, it took on a whole different conversation.
Right.
On your end, it's about budget. What can you afford? What do you want to give up? What do you want to retain as your own? So that was probably the steepest learning curve. And I had many failures before we had successes. I thought it was going to be easy because my first customer was my current employer. My second customer came to me through Railroad Card because they were struggling, and they
Right.
called me.
Yeah. So
And
it's
I
all in the
thought
bag.
that's how it's all going to happen. That's
It's
going to
just
be
gonna
the
fall
way
in
it
your
happens.
lap, right?
Yeah, I'm going to sit back at my desk, and they're just going to call me up. And by the way, I'm a committed capitalist. I wanted to make a ton of money. I wanted to build a big business. I wanted everybody to get rich and have a great time. I think you need all of those delusions when you start out, and then you
Yeah.
get the sandpaper takes effect, and you start to learn through the school of hard knocks. To me, though I got an education and a degree in criminal justice, I got an MBA in business trying to build LPI
Absolutely.
because I've
Absolutely.
made a ton of mistakes. And we were a wholly owned sub of a public company, which we then spun out. We were trying to spin out as a separate public company. From there, we had to emerge from the parent company going into bankruptcy to being bought by a private equity firm, to then go into private equity, venture capital, and eventually getting rid of all of those folks and owning it on our own. So, but it was the most challenging, frustrating thing I've ever done, but also the most enjoyable. And I would not, if I had to repeat it all over again. So those folks that are thinking in this entrepreneurial way to do something, I say do it.
Right.
Dive in, but have some cash in the bank because you don't want private equity. And to the extent you have partners that are committed and can help support the business, but be prepared to make mistakes, and your phone won't ring. You have to beat the street. You have to get out there. And I say this with the most sincerity I can conjure. You have to really believe that what you're doing is good for your customer, that you actually are helping them be a better business, and you can't fake it.
Stephen, anything you're selling, I don't care if it was LPI or if it's shoes, you have to believe in what you're selling, or you're not going to be. You can fake it for a minute, but eventually people will figure it out if you don't believe in what you're saying.
You will be found out. I think because we were selling a service, we were selling ourselves. Our product was our people. There was an even greater emphasis on that. Sometimes I would look at the folks that were selling hardware and it was changing so rapidly. You could run across a salesperson that could go from product to product to product. That was something I wasn't built for. I felt like I had to commit totally emotionally to what I was providing my customers. And the other side of that, Stefanie, is what I did learn when we were successful selling is my customers, not only did I care deeply about their success, they became my friends. I went to their when they had babies, when they got married, when they had big life events, and I take great pride in that. It was hard for me, and I know some people could be critical of this, but I don't know how you separate yourself from the professional and the personal. Like there's time for a professional relationship, but how do you not become personally involved?
Well, your
I
job's a
don't know
lot
how to
more.
do that.
Your job's a lot more fun if you can joke around and get to know people on a personal level. If everything's just business across the board, man, that's kind of dry and boring, right?
Very, very. It's not interesting, and it's there were times when it doesn't mean you get off the hook, right? If you make a mistake and you're providing them a service,
absolutely,
you're going to be held accountable, and you own it and you make it right. But you can, in most cases, you could separate the personal from the professional. And at the end of the day, we took great pride in the fact that after 20 some odd years of building a business, we had some of the original customers that started with us, that were with us until the day I sold the business in 2018. And some were gone because of business failure, or they were acquired by somebody else, or a new director showed up and decided to be internal. And that's okay. That was we never took that personal. It was like, okay, well, you go down that path, and I'll continue to reach out and try to be available if you think differently down the road. But it was just such a wonderful experience. Even there were times when I was so frustrated with things like beyond our control. What happened in 08, 09 when the market collapsed,
Right.
when Wall Street had a hiccup, when the real estate market went bust. But if you commit to your customers, you'll survive those difficult times. The hardest thing I had to deal with, and I warn all fellow entrepreneurs, is the venture capital community. If they invest in your company, they have high expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't perform, they'll replace you without a second thought. So I would encourage people as they walk down that path to look at angel investors, people, and you have to be honest with them. You have to say, listen, be prepared that whatever you invest in me, be prepared to lose. You got to know that from the get-go. Mm-hmm. If you put a couple $100,000 in and you're this one small investor, but you're an angel investor, you're a friend or family, there's the risk that you could lose it all. So as long as everybody understands that from the beginning, then I think you can ride the ups and downs.
Let me ask you about, I was thinking about you and just entrepreneurs, and like, if you have a great idea, there has to be a part of you that's like, oh my God, I have to quickly get this up and running before someone else thinks of this and jumps in and does this, whatever it is. Did you feel that?
So I did. I thought this XBR product, and now there's tons of, as I thought, everybody would have exception-based reporting as a core part of what they did in LP and asset protection. I thought if we didn't take advantage of this shift, other people would. And there were folks that I respect and admire. Mm-hmm. I know back when I started LPI, I think Jim Lee was having conversations with Kevin Lynch about that very same topic. Two guys that I admire, who had done wonderful things, and I consider both friends and mentors, but they were having that same dialogue. So I did think there had to be a sense of urgency. And then along the way, there were other people that did indeed compete with us and offered a very similar solution with some small differences. But competition is great. It keeps you focused. It keeps you sharp.
It does.
It keeps you, and make sure you definitely don't become complacent. You never take your customers for granted. And the purpose of a competitor is to compete. And my job with a competitor, I'll be professional, I'll be nice, but my job is to put them out of business, as their job is to do the same to me. So it's about not sharing the market, but it's taking the market. So I've always sort of applied sports analogies to competitors. Not that they're evil or they're bad or they're terrible providers, but they're competitors. And if you go out into the football field, you want to win. There was that sense of urgency. And by the way, the first person to market is the market mover, and you get the early adopters, and that tends to give you credibility that the folks that come 5 or 10 years later don't have. So
exactly,
you see it first.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I went into the business first, Stefanie. I don't know if I saw the opportunity first. Kevin Lynch and Jim Lee, I think, were talking about it before I even formed LPI. I didn't know that.
Interesting. Yeah, that's I guess for another day, right? We'd have to dig into that and see who thought of it first.
And two great friends of mine. And I admire both of their careers. And I've learned so much from both of them. Kevin is a consummate salesman.
Oh my gosh, he's one of the best.
Jim, sort of ushered in the modern approach from security to loss prevention and asset protection. So I've learned a ton from them.
Yeah, I'm sure over a drink I could probably get it out of it, but I might get a different story from each of you.
You might. It's the truth may be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, right. So then let's fast forward, right? So I know there's been some changes over the last couple of years. Talk to me about, why you're willing to risk it all again. Like, what's happening?
That's a good question. It's a tough
Yeah, why?
question.
Why are you doing this to yourself?
So when I sold the business in 2018,
Mhm.
there were some very personal reasons behind that, related to spending time with the thing I valued most, which was my family, my wife, my kids, my grandkids, my daughter-in-law, and just being around them on a much more consistent basis. When I was growing LPI, it became the all-consuming thing in my life at the
Right.
expense of time with my family. And this sort of this health scare that I had forced me to reconcile that and look at what did I want to do, how did I want to spend time. And in 2017, I was approached by a business I was very familiar with that thought what LPI did would be an incredible add-on, a strategic add-on to what they did on the technology side.
Mhm.
And they presented over, it took about a year, but we ended up negotiating a great offer. And it provided for the entire LPI team to continue on intact, because there was this function did not exist in their business. And we were marrying the emergence of AI and new technology with professional services. So it
Mhm.
was really a complete solution. And I really liked the ownership team. The gentleman's name is Sam Nafisi. He started a company called DTT. They rebranded it after the acquisition of LPI DTIQ. And if, from my understanding, till today, the vast majority of the LPI team is still there, doing great work, and helping build a very successful business. And they were, I'm not surprised because they were the key components of building a successful LPI. So I said, they also, of course, when they sell, when you're the principal founder and developer of the concept, they don't want to compete with you right away. So
Right.
I insisted that they were going to not only pay me over time for the business, which is common, but also put inside a non-compete for 5 years because they didn't want to wake up
That's a long
in a
one.
year. It's a long wait, but they paid me for 4 of those 5, so
Okay.
it wasn't. It was a good relationship. But I thought, so a couple of things happened. The first year I was pretty active in the transition, but like anything, change, right? Change is a constant. They brought in a new CEO from the old. Sam took a back seat. They went in a different direction. What I did and my role there continued to diminish over time. It got to a point where we all agreed that I get paid to do nothing, and to honor the non-compete, which is what I did.
Mhm.
And now if they called me and said, "Hey, could you support me on this?" So that I was there in a minute. But they moved on as they brought in new team members, new CFO, new marketing director, and some of the folks that worked for me grew in their own roles, and it was time for me to retire and spend more time with the grandkids. And by about year 3, Stephanie, I realized that the blessing I have is that I have the blessing of time.
Mhm.
So when you think about the most important things in your life, it's not money, it's not the things you acquire, it's the people you love, the relationships you have, and the time you have with those folks. And I had a lot of time, and I realized I was going to have quite a bit more time. And I also realized that I just could only golf so much. I was uh, getting fat. I don't know if that's probably politically incorrect, but I was gaining weight.
It's, as long
I
as I'm not
felt
the one saying it, it's okay.
I felt intellectually lazy because
Oh,
I was
yeah.
always looking for the next challenge,
Right.
and those things didn't go away. So I had a bunch of friends that I've had over the years, and we talked about a new concept that
Mhm.
and they started that business, and when my non-compete ended, they asked me to re-engage with them to help build a new business, but um, I am engaging with them, Stephanie, but not at the level I was before. So I am trying to manage a better balance between
Good.
my personal life and supporting their efforts.
Hmm.
I am an investor in that business. So as you can clearly tell, I talk a lot. And
No, I
and then you
hadn't
ask me,
noticed.
no, you ask me one question, and you're like, oh my God, he's gone on for 20 minutes. But I am there to advise. I am there to financially support that business.
Hmm.
Again, it's the old concept of they got really smart people. They really know what they're doing. They've been doing this for 25, 35 years.
Hmm.
And I'm helping them financially. I'm helping them make payroll, and I'm giving advice when asked and getting out of their way.
Right.
And it's exciting. I'm able to look at this. A big risk. The risk this time is it's my money, and my
Hmm.
wife is less than thrilled that I'm doing this. But I'm not risking everything, obviously.
Right.
But it's a sizable investment for me and a few other folks, and I get to work with people I absolutely care about, and I enjoy working with and giving advice to whether they listen or not. But I keep learning from them, so it's reciprocal. Not a key component for a good entrepreneur is perseverance, right?
Hmm.
Never never quitting, right? Never like there'll be bad days, never throwing in the towel, but also is being a lifetime learner, but realizing that when you hire really smart people that are aggressive and ambitious, you're going to learn as much from them as they're going to learn from you.